Now, when we look at the different proteins within a cell membrane, cells can have many different types of proteins that are going to carry out different functions. It just depends on what the cell needs to do. Some of the membrane proteins act as attachment anchors. So, for instance, here, this first figure shows you a protein that is going to be able to attach to the interior of the cell, the cytoskeleton, which is kind of like the bones of the cell. But then on the other side, on the extracellular side, it has an attachment point to attach to the extracellular matrix. An example of this would be a cell needing to hold on to a place in the body without getting swept away, keeping an organ in place. You don't want it all over the body. You don't want any of your organs just floating willy-nilly. You need them secured. Another function of some membrane proteins is to join to other cells. Again, we have this term inter, so within cellular joining, okay? So these are also known as CAMs, or cell adhesion molecules, and essentially these proteins will bind with a protein of another cell in its membrane and keep them attached. Cell-to-cell recognition is another function of cell membrane proteins. There are certain proteins whose job is to recognize other cells, and these glycoproteins, which are very similar to the glycolipids, the difference is that instead of being attached to a lipid within the membrane, it's attached to a protein. And so these glycoproteins can serve as a marker or an indicator of the cell type, so that other cells can come along and say, oh, that's who you are. Another function of certain proteins in the plasma membrane, some actually are involved in enzymatic activity. If you remember from chapter 2, when we talked about the function of enzymes, they essentially speed up reactions. And so enzymes in the cell membrane can help increase the reaction rate of molecules within the cell. The last two types of functions that I want to talk about involve getting things in and out of the cell. So the cell membrane is a barrier, right? It keeps the inside and the outside of the cell separate. So in order for things to get through the membrane, they oftentimes have to be transported across. There are proteins that function solely to get molecules in and out of the cell. So it's transporting. Another similar type of protein is going to do what we call signal transduction. These proteins have receptors that are basically waiting for their specific molecule to bind in the extracellular fluid, and it acts as a signal to say, okay, protein receptor, you can cause whatever transduction, or not transduction, but cause this event to happen within the cell. So these two are very important, and a couple of characteristics about these last two, transport proteins and signal transduction proteins, is that they have some specific things in common. They all transport proteins and all receptor proteins exhibit specificity. What we mean by that is that they will only work for certain molecules. You have to have a specific molecule that will fit within a transport protein, because it has to be the right shape, the right size. It has to fit. You have to have the right and the specific molecule to bind the receptor. The receptor proteins have a very specific spot made for a specific molecular signal. So both of these proteins exhibit specificity. Both of them also exhibit what we call competition and saturation. This means that if you have 100, I'm going to start with saturation. If you have 100 of these proteins, either receptor or transport proteins in the membrane, once 100 molecules bind all hundreds of those, it doesn't matter if you have 150 molecules in the extracellular membrane. Only 100 membrane proteins are present, and so only those can be bound. So once they're all full, they're full, okay? It's like running out of parking spaces at a parking lot. once those 100 parking spaces are full, it doesn't matter if there are 50 more cars running around, they're not going to fit. This also then ties into competition. If you have a competing molecule, then that can also happen to fit, say, in this pizza shape receptor, then you have competition between the regular signal, the one that normally activates the receptor or binds the receptor, and a different molecule that can just happen to fit. And so this is competition. So let's say, for instance, those super large trucks that should not go into a compact car space in the parking lot, but they do because, well, technically they can fit, but sometimes they overflow, and those were not meant for the small compact car spaces were not meant for the large SUVs or the large pickup trucks. But sometimes they'll compete. If there are no parking lot spaces left, those large trucks will maybe just take a compact car space because they're competing. So there's my example for that. These are the functions of different membrane proteins that are really important for cell function and for allowing things to get in and out of the cells.